Welcome, survivors. If you are new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me to keep these stories and posts coming. While you are here, please let me know where you are listening from. Now, let's get started. Blizzard Siege of Sioux Falls. Act 1. The Descent into the White. The five friends, Ethan, the driver and reluctant leader, Sarah, the perpetually worried planner, Liam, the source of nervous jokes, Maya, the calm and collected observer, and Jake, the quiet, sturdy backbone, had started the day with optimistic cheers aimed at the Canadian border. Now, at 7 p.m., somewhere off a forgotten highway near Sioux Falls, South Dakota, they were staring into a swirling, blinding hell. The blizzard had struck with the ferocity of a fist. Visibility was zero, the wind a sustained, punishing roar. The old sedan, packed with skis and backpacks, had sputtered, coughed on the last drops of gas, and finally died an hour ago, the bitter cold immediately seeping in. When the engine's last flicker of warmth vanished, so did their hope of waiting it out. "We have to move," Ethan had finally declared, his breath fogging instantly. "The forecast said this lasts all night. We'll freeze solid by midnight." They wrapped themselves in blankets, pulled ski masks low, and stumbled into the whiteout. The trek was a brutal, disorienting nightmare of heavy snow, ice, and wind that bit through their clothes. Their hands and feet were numb within minutes. Then, through a temporary, swirling break in the curtain of snow, Maya spotted it, a dark square shape low to the ground. "A cabin," she gasped, pointing. "There, behind the grove." Relief flooded them, sharp and dizzying. It was salvation. It was a lie. They staggered into the small derelict structure. The door was heavy, swollen with damp, and only slightly ajar. Inside, it was pitch black and arctic cold, the air thick with the smell of damp wood, mildew, and something else, a musky, gamey scent, old and unsettling. There was no electricity. The windows were grimy and rattling, and the hearth held only dead ashes. "It's a hunting shack, maybe," Jake said, dropping his heavy pack. Ethan located a box of ancient matches and managed to light a dusty oil lantern they found on a shelf. The weak, flickering orange glow barely penetrated the gloom, casting long, nervous shadows that danced with the wind. "Okay, plan. We barricade the door and windows, we pool our rations, and we wait for sunrise," Ethan said, trying to sound authoritative over the howling wind. As they began pushing a heavy iron-bound trunk against the main door, Sarah paused, clutching her throat. "Does anyone else smell that? Like wet dog but worse?" Liam, ever the cynic, shivered. "That's just the authentic South Dakota cabin experience, sweetie. Probably a dead raccoon in the walls." "Let's get this done." Just as they finished bracing the door, the first sound that wasn't the wind cut through the night. It was a scrape, a heavy, dragging sound from the back of the cabin, followed by a low, guttural inhale that sounded closer than anything outside should be. "Did you hear that?" Maya whispered, her eyes wide, staring into the impenetrable darkness of the cabin's far corner. Suddenly, a loud, heavy thud hit the back wall, vibrating the floorboards under their feet. It was deliberate. It was alive. The time is 8 p.m. Act 2. The Barricade and the Beast. 8 p.m., 8:15 p.m. The first contact. Ethan snatched the rusty fire poker resting next to the cold hearth. "Everyone away from the windows. Liam, Jake, help me check the back door now." Liam, his usual smirk gone, fumbled for the small, half-empty can of mace he carried. As he turned, a shape materialized at the grimy, small window closest to the ground. It wasn't the wind. It was a vast, dark mass that briefly obscured the glass, followed by the terrifying, scraping sound of thick claws raking against the wooden window frame. Sarah screamed, a short, choked sound. "It's huge!" Jake roared, lunging forward to throw his body against the window frame. The scraping stopped, replaced by a deep, wet sniff. Then a raw, inhuman growl, a sound born of hunger and muscle that rattled their bones and seemed to absorb the sound of the storm itself. "It's a wolf!" "A massive one!" Ethan yelled, grabbing an old wooden chair and smashing it, intending to use the broken legs as crude spears. "It's not just a wolf, Ethan," Maya said, her voice unnaturally steady as she stared at the window where the thing had been. "Look." Imprinted in the thick frost clinging to the outside of the window, visible for a split second before the snow obscured it, was a print, not a dog or a wolf. It was massive, 3 times the size of a human hand, with blunt, terrifyingly powerful claws and a structure that screamed bipedal. It was a werewolf. They worked in a frenzy. Jake and Liam hauled another heavy chest and stacked it against the door. Ethan and Maya started dragging anything they could, old barrels, splintered crates to stack against the most vulnerable windows. The blizzard outside was now their ally, obscuring the world, but the darkness inside was their enemy. 8:15 p.m., 8:30 p.m., testing the defenses. The beast began testing their defenses methodically. It didn't charge. It probed. A low, whining keen came from the east wall, followed by a sudden, violent crack. The window they had just braced with a stack of old magazines shattered inward, shards of ice and glass spraying across the floor. They hadn't stacked high enough. Ethan yelled, shielding his face, as a massive dark limb thick with coarse, wet black fur slammed through the opening, blindly sweeping. The limb ended in a talon that looked more like a hunting knife. Liam reacted instantly, spraying the full can of mace into the dark hole. The creature's howl was immediate and deafening, a sound of pure, blinding rage that made Sarah fall to her knees, clamping her hands over her ears. Jake fell onto his back, his face white, trying to stifle his pain. They were 3 feet from a door that could collapse at any moment, and one of them was severely injured. 8:45 p.m., 9 p.m., the hour of blood. The werewolf, fueled by the taste of blood, stopped probing and began a focused assault on the main door. It was a relentless, rhythmic pounding bam, bam, bam. "We have to get Jake out or we use the back vent," Ethan said, his voice raw. "The back vent is too small for Jake to crawl through with that leg," Maya countered, her eyes scanning the splintering door. "We need a distraction. A way to lure it away from the main entrance, then maybe we can try for a larger window." Liam, seeing the futility, made a decision. He grabbed the oil lantern and the last of their camping fuel. "I'm going to make some noise out back. Maya, Ethan, as soon as it moves, get Jake and Sarah to the front door. It's weak, but it's still standing." Before Ethan could protest, Liam kicked open the small back vent Maya had indicated, tossed the fuel-soaked rag they used to clean their pots, lit it with a match, and tossed the whole lamp, rag, and fuel through the hole into the snowy darkness. "Hey! Buy dinner's out here," Liam screamed. The effect was instantaneous. The pounding on the front door ceased. They heard a confused snort, followed by massive crashing steps circling the cabin. "Go! Go!" Ethan screamed, grabbing Jake's arm. Maya helped Sarah pull Jake toward the shattered front door. As they reached it, they heard the werewolf let out a final, triumphant roar from the back. Liam had successfully drawn its attention and failed to survive the engagement. The sickening sounds of a struggle and a short, shrill scream were muffled by the snow, but not by the terror in their hearts. "It's coming back. Move!" Ethan, Maya, and Sarah managed to drag Jake through the broken frame of the front door just as the first massive shoulder of the beast slammed into the back wall, ripping a section of the wood away. They collapsed outside into the swirling whiteout. Act 3. The Last Stand. 9 p.m., 9:15 p.m., the escape and the pursuit. They were outside, but the blizzard was a blessing and a curse. It swallowed the cabin, but it swallowed them too. "The car. We need the car keys," Ethan gasped, trying to pull Jake further. Jake was a dead weight, his leg pouring blood that melted the snow beneath him. "It's useless, the snow. It's too deep." The werewolf was instantly on their trail. Unlike the humans, it moved effortlessly through the drifts, its massive bulk a dark, low shadow cutting through the wind. They heard the heavy thump-thump of its paws getting closer. "Hide!" Sarah shrieked, pointing toward a stand of skeletal cottonwood trees nearby. They managed to drag Jake into the sparse shelter of the trees. The werewolf, smelling the fresh trail of blood, overshot them, stopping at a small clearing where it sniffed the air, its silhouette massive and hunched against the snow. It was a nightmare vision, part man, part wolf, standing nearly 10 feet tall, its fur matted with snow and ice, its eyes glowing yellow in the dark. "It's hunting by scent," Maya whispered, pulling off her coat and ripping a strip from her thermal shirt. "Ethan, cover Jake's wound with snow, pack it hard. Sarah, take this, use snow to wipe away our tracks backwards." Sarah, despite her terror, nodded, finding a new, terrible strength. She began hysterically wiping their tracks back toward the cabin. 9:15 p.m., 9:30 p.m., the decoy. The beast turned back, its muzzle low to the ground, sniffing out the blood trail. It was slow but meticulous. "It's too close," Ethan said, his hands freezing from packing snow onto Jake's wound. Maya suddenly grabbed a handful of Jake's blood-soaked snow and threw it hard in the opposite direction, toward a small, frozen creek bed. The werewolf's head snapped up. It hesitated for a moment, then, with a thunderous rush, it charged the decoy scent toward the creek bed. "Now!" "Follow the creek. It'll be shallower than the drifts," Maya yelled, pulling Ethan and Sarah away. They couldn't carry Jake. He was fading, shivering uncontrollably. "Go, get help. Tell them what you saw," Jake forced out, grasping Ethan's hand. "Don't let it catch all of us." "I'm a good decoy." Ethan looked into his friend's eyes, seeing not fear but resolution. He knew if they stayed, they would all die. He squeezed Jake's hand. "We'll be back." Ethan, Maya, and Sarah stumbled toward the frozen creek bed, the sound of the werewolf's frustrated snarls behind them as it realized the trick. 9:30 p.m., 9:45 p.m., the creek. The frozen creek bed offered slightly easier travel, but the storm was intensifying again. The wind was a physical force, pushing them sideways. They heard the howling again, a long, mournful sound that was quickly getting closer. The werewolf was done playing games. "We need to break the ice," Ethan suddenly realized. "If we break the ice, it'll slow it down. It's too heavy for a quick run, and the cold water will distract it." They found a heavy, snow-covered branch. Ethan and Maya started smashing the thin, refrozen ice covering the creek. Sack, sack, sack. As they worked, Sarah, looking behind them, let out a choked cry. "It's right there. Behind the boulder." The werewolf, its yellow eyes blazing through the snow, lunged forward, clearing the last few feet of ground in a single bound. It was aiming for the easiest target, Sarah, who was paralyzed by terror. Maya shoved Sarah out of the way, but she wasn't fast enough to save herself. The creature's immense, crushing weight slammed into Maya's side, sending her flying into the smashed ice where she disappeared under the freezing water and dark slush. The beast, however, was also caught off balance, its front paws sinking into the freezing, broken water. It roared in pain and surprise. The shock of the sub-zero water was a true deterrent. 9:45 p.m., 10 p.m., the final push. Ethan knew this was it. They had bought mere seconds. He grabbed the heavy branch, now wet and slick, and spun, charging the creature while it struggled to pull its massive front half from the frozen creek. He brought the branch down with all his remaining strength, aiming for the side of the monster's head. The wood connected with a sickening thwack. It wasn't enough to kill it, but it was enough to stagger it. The beast shook its head, letting out a pain-filled shriek, and focused its rage entirely on Ethan, its eyes burning with hateful intelligence. It reared back on its hind legs, preparing to leap. Sarah, who had crawled to the edge of the creek bed, saw something glinting near her hand, the rusty, heavy iron kettle Maya had carried from the cabin and dropped when she was hit. As the werewolf was airborne, a massive, muscular shadow against the white sky, Sarah screamed and flung the kettle blindly forward. It struck the werewolf squarely in the open, gaping jaw. The creature's leap faltered. The heavy iron momentarily stunned it, forcing its teeth to clench shut in a painful, disorienting spasm. The beast landed short, sliding on the remaining thin ice, and with a terrible final scraping noise, it plunged completely under the water. The air was filled with a muffled thrashing, followed by a profound, terrifying silence. Ethan grabbed Sarah's arm. "Keep running! Don't stop!" They ran blindly, fueled by adrenaline, away from the creek, away from the cabin, away from the hour of unadulterated horror. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs gave out, collapsing beside a snow-drifted fence line just as the storm seemed to take a final deep breath and lessen its fury. When the sun finally broke through the clouds several hours later, turning the world a harsh, blinding white, it found Sarah Holloway curled against the freezing body of Ethan, who had died sometime before dawn from exposure and exhaustion. Sarah was the only one left. The blizzard had left behind a perfectly still, frozen landscape. She crawled away, sobbing, moving toward a distant, lonely power line, the sole, terrified survivor of a hunt that had lasted exactly one endless, brutal hour.